Luka Krajnovic is one of the newest players on Gonzaga's roster, but after a very strong showing at Craziness in the Kennel, what can this player bring to the program in year one and beyond? We're going to talk about it on today's Locked On Zags.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Welcome to the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of the Locked On Podcast Network. Make every moment more, folks. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 back in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon today to get started. Happy November, folks. It is officially the start of the college basketball season. We got an exhibition game coming just a couple days from now against Lewis Clark State. First game of the season next Friday against Yale on November 10th. And we are continuing our player preview series today, discussing every player on Gonzaga's roster. We're taking a look at their history, how they ended up here in Spokane. We're also going to talk about their best and worst case scenarios for this upcoming season, and then close out the show talking about realistic role, realistic expectations, as well as their future. How many more years will they be at Gonzaga? Do they have an NBA career in line? All of that stuff. We have talked about Ben Gregg. We've talked about Ryan Nembhard, Steele Venters, Dusty Stromer, and Nolan Hickman. Every one of those episodes is, and Graham Ike, I missed him. All of those are in your feed. You can go find them on the playlist on YouTube. Today, we're talking another freshman. A couple of freshmen on this roster, a handful of guys who are going to play, who've never played Division I college basketball before. One of them is Luka Krajnovic. We're going to talk about Krajnovic today here. Luka is a 6'5" guard coming over from Zagreb, Croatia. He signed with Gonzaga in August of this year. Not the latest player to join Gonzaga's roster, mind you. It was a very long offseason with roster movement happening back in April and roster movement happening all the way into late September. Krajnovic was one of the latest players to join the roster. He signed with the team in August of 2023. He's ranked the 25th best European prospect in the 2004 class. They ranked them based on the year you were born. So Krajnovic is considered one of the 25, 30 or so best Euro players in his class. Now he has signed with Gonzaga. A little bit about his history. He kind of first popped up on the radar in the FIBA tournaments. He was with the U16 back in 2016, U18 with Croatia in 2021, and then he was with that U18 FIBA team again in 2022, averaged 13 points and 5 rebounds that year. And then last year he played professionally with Basko Zagreb in Croatia, the top Croatian league, and he was an absolute monster. 17.6 points per game, 4.4 rebounds, played about 31 minutes a night. He led the entire league in total points scored. He made 35 three-pointers, made them at a similar 35% clip as well, had a handful of 20-point games, was named the league's MVP, and was a first-team all-league member. So at 18, 19 years old, Luka Krajnovic led a top Croatian league team in scoring, led the league in scoring. This dude was a machine for his squad last year in Croatia. Now he comes to Gonzaga. He comes across the pond, gets a chance to join Gonzaga's incredibly fruitful international pipeline. No mysteries about that. Gonzaga has had so much success recruiting internationally, dating, of course, all the way back to the Roni Turiafs of the world, Kelly Olynyk, to more, Domantas Sabonis, to some more modern guys, Martinas Arlauskas. There's a recent one, Filip Petrusev, just got traded to the Los Angeles Clippers. That's a whole story going on right now. Of course, Rui Hachimura in the NBA with the Los Angeles Lakers. Like, they have had so much success with international recruits. And we're going to continue to see that. Many people were afraid when Tommy Lloyd left Gonzaga that he would take that international recruiting with him to Arizona, and he has to his credit, they have recruited very well internationally, but the idea that Gonzaga's pipeline was only built by Tommy Lloyd has been proven to not be true, as this Gonzaga roster, of course, has Krajnovic. They add Pavel Stosic as well. Prior to that, they had added Jun Sok Yo from South Korea. They added him back in January of this year. So continuing the international flavor in Spokane, continuing to add players from all over the globe to this program. And Krajnovic comes in, and we haven't seen much of him. We've seen the highlights from the U19 tournaments. We've seen some clips of him online, but what we did get to see from him was a performance at Craziness in the Kennel. His whole family was in town. It was a wonderful family affair for them to get to go to Spokane, see Gonzaga, see the campus, see where he's going to call home for the next couple of years, and then see him go out and play really well in the Craziness in the Kennel event. He won the skills contest over Ryan Nembhard. Not going to take that result incredibly seriously. It doesn't say anything negative about Ryan Nembhard, but shows that our young guy can ball. He can ball a little bit, and went out there, won himself a tournament in front of this crowd, and then went into the scrimmage and played excellent. 11 points on 4 or 5 shooting at Craziness. He had a pair of boards. He also had an assist. Looked good coming off screens. Looked like the tenacious on-ball defensive player. Like really looked comfortable for not just comfortable for a freshman, but a freshman who has at the time had been in Spokane for like 10 weeks, maybe something like that, less than 3 months, probably closer to 2 months. I think that Krajnovic had actually been in Spokane, been around Gonzaga, been in the program, and he's out there looking like a seasoned veteran during Craziness in the Kennel. Really impressive, eye-opening performance from Krajnovic in that event. And now he comes into a situation where he's got 2 veteran guards in front of him. So what is that going to look like? What is the playing time going to materialize like? What is the best case scenario for Krajnovic? What is the best case scenario for Gonzaga? And how might this shake out in a best and worst case scenario for Krajnovic entering his first season in Spokane? We're going to talk about all of that after a word from today's sponsor, FanDuel. Folks, score early and often this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 into your pocket if your team wins. And if you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there is no better time than right now to get in on the action. The app is crazy easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options. You can bet on spreads. You can bet on player props. You can bet on over-unders and more. And folks, if you want to bet on the Zags, they currently have 800-1 odds to be in the Final Four next year. You want to drop $25 on the Zags making the Final Four. And then when that weekend rolls around, you can celebrate a Final Four appearance from Mark Few's team and an extra $200 in your pocket. So folks, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon today and kick off that NFL season. FanDuel, an official partner of the NFL. All right, folks, continuing our player preview series here. First of all, I want to thank all of you who make this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Sincerely, as we get into November and we get into the meat of the college basketball season, the real first month with games, I want to appreciate all of you who have stuck with us throughout the offseason, whether this is your 200th time listening, 10th time listening, whatever it may be. It is sincerely appreciated. I look forward to continuing to chat with you all throughout the season. Of course, you can join our Discord channel if you have not done so yet. There's a link in the show notes. It is free. We were the first place to have a secret scrimmage result from the Baylor game, so you can join us and get some inside tips, some scoops, some stuff going on. Again, all free on that Discord channel in the notes below. For now, though, we are continuing our player preview episode on Luka Krajnovic, new freshman for the Gonzaga Bulldogs coming over from Croatia. And I say this for every episode where we do these player previews. They're best case within reason, worst case without injury. What I mean by that, I think, is fairly self-explanatory, but the best case is within reason. Every player's best case scenario is that they are the National Player of the Year, that they are the National Finals MVP, that they hoist the trophy above their head, winning a championship and winning MVP. For most players, that's not realistic. So we kind of keep those best case scenarios within the realm of realistic scenarios for said player. And then for injuries, the worst case scenario for every player is that they get hurt and don't play. That's not particularly interesting or relevant to discuss. So we're going to discuss worst case scenarios that could happen on the court. And we'll start optimistically with the best case scenarios. The best case scenario for Luka Krajnovic is that he settles in as the team's top guard off the bench. That is his clearly defined role as the third guard for Gonzaga behind Ryan Nembhard and Nolan Hickman. Positions are always a little bit wonky. I think Dusty Stromer is going to play some guard. I think that Steele Venters, even as the projected starting three, might play some guard in lineups with Junsak Yo on the floor, maybe in jumbo lineups with Greg and Watson and Ike on the floor. I think there's a possibility for Venters to play some at the wing, or at the two, but for the most part, Ryan Nembhard, Nolan Hickman are going to soak up the majority of the minutes at the guard positions. And in the best case scenario for Luka Krajnovic, he is clearly third on that list in terms of minutes. The best case scenario for Luka Krajnovic, similarly, he is the seventh man on this roster. You have a projected starting five of Nembhard, Hickman, Venters, Watson, Ike. That would have Ben Gregg coming off the bench as the sixth man. And the best case scenario for Krajnovic, he's right next to him. He's number 7. He's ahead of Dusty Stromer. He's ahead of Junsak Yo. He's ahead of Braden Huff on the depth chart. How does this happen? Well, the best case scenario for Luka Krajnovic is that he displays the ability to play both the point guard and the shooting guard position in Gonzaga's offense. I suspect it will be more important for him to showcase those combo guard abilities. That's what they brought him here for. That's the role he played in Croatia. And they have two very established point guards in Nembhard and Hickman. I think that Nolan Hickman's the backup point guard. Luka Krajnovic isn't the backup point guard. When Nembhard is not on the floor, Nolan Hickman will be on the floor and he will be playing the point guard. I also expect Ryan Nembhard to play something like 33, 34 minutes per game. So there will not be very many minutes where Nembhard is not on the floor. And when they are, I think Hickman will probably be playing the 1. I think Krajnovic might be on the floor alongside Nolan Hickman in those minutes, but I think he's more likely to play the 2 off-ball role. But in a best-case scenario, Krajnovic shows the ability to play both positions, which makes him more versatile and makes him more valuable as a bench piece for Mark Few and the Zags. Best-case scenario for Luka Krajnovic is that his outside shooting is an immediate weapon. He comes in, he comes off the bench, he bombs threes, he knocks them down. 40% in his first year as a freshman would be incredible. We're talking best case scenarios. Could it happen? Heck yeah. About 35% in Croatia last year. Billed as somebody who's a really good shooter, looked good as a shooter in Craziness in the Kennel. Him coming in, dealing with Division I college basketball floor spacing, a little bit different situation, high octane offense, getting a lot of open looks. I could see him coming in and just knocking shots down. And in that best case scenario, he is clearly doing that and is immediately valuable to this Gonzaga roster because of that outside shooting ability. The best case scenario for Luka Krajnovic is that the experience he has gained playing against older players professionally gives him a leg up as a freshman for Gonzaga. This could happen in multiple different ways. I think a big element of it could be his ability to impact the game defensively. Luka Krajnovic has played against 28-year-olds. He's played against older, more physically mature veteran players than somebody like Dusty Stromer, than somebody like, the other freshmen or newcomers or younger guys on this Gonzaga roster. He has gained some of that experience in a way that I think could help him. And if we're talking best case scenario for Krajnovic specifically, being able to utilize that experience over older players against those more mature guys and being a tenacious on-ball defender, being somebody who can immediately make good decisions with the basketball because you've played at those faster paces, because you've played at levels that are, just different. Again, I compare him to Dusty because they're playing the same position, and I think the comparison is obvious. I'm not taking anything away from the competition. Dusty played some of the best high school players in the country. He's played some phenomenal competition, but he's played high schoolers. And so I think Luka has a bit of an advantage in that way of having played against older, more experienced players. And I think, again, if we're talking best case scenario for Krajnovic, is that he's able to leverage that advantage to make him more physically imposing right away, tougher, more physical. Maybe the basketball IQ stuff is a little bit higher, and he's just more ready to contribute to this team right away on offense and defense because of that experience gained. The best case scenario for Luka Krajnovic is that he continues to knock on the door for more playing time. Ideally, if people are calling for him to play more, it is less about struggles from Gonzaga's starters. It is more about, hey, he has earned the minutes that he has gotten, and he has earned more. Ideally for Gonzaga, Nolan Hickman, Ryan Nembhard, and Luka Krajnovic are all playing well. Dusty Stromer's also playing well, and they're trying to figure out, how do we split these minutes? How do we take minutes away from somebody who's playing well and give them to somebody like Krajnovic, who's also playing well? The best case scenario for Gonzaga and for Krajnovic is that those are the questions that we're asking. and that by the end of the year, Krajnovic's minutes have steadily increased. He has been more relied upon in the first half. He's not just coming in the second half. There's more to his game as the year goes on, and we see that development night in and night out over the winter here in Spokane. Statistically, best case scenarios for Luka Krajnovic, similar to Malachi Smith. The absolute best case scenario, I think, for Luka Krajnovic in year one would look similar to what Malachi Smith did last year. This is like top end best case scenario. Malachi Smith last year, about 21 minutes per game, 8.7 points, shot 50% from deep. For Krajnovic, 15 to 20 minutes per game, 8-ish points per game, 40+% from three. So just like a little lower than that is where I think like the best case. This is a phenomenal freshman season from Krajnovic. This is who Mark Few wanted. This is why they weren't as concerned about finding other guards in the portal once they landed him. Like, this is the guy that they knew they were getting. Best case scenario, he's a WCC Sixth Man of the Year candidate. And when we're looking at the 24-25 roster, we're trying to figure out how the heck are we going to fit him in? Nolan Hickman could come back. Ryan Nembhard could come back. If both those guys come back, the best case scenario for Krajnovic is that people are a little worried. Like, what does this mean for him? Where is he going to play? How's he going to sneak into this conversation? What are the worst case scenarios for Luka Krajnovic? Well, it's that the adjustment to college basketball takes time. Something that has been the case for basically every international player who has come over. You could maybe make an argument that Domantas Sabonis looked ready from year one, but he also spent a lot of time in the States. His dad played in the NBA. Like, that's a bit of a different situation. Even some of Gonzaga's best international players ever took time. Kelly Olynyk took time. Shemek Karnowski took time. Like, this doesn't, Rui took a ton of time. Like, this does not happen right away. And for a player who did not commit to this program until August, it is fair to expect that there is a learning curve that might prevent him from being a big-time contributor in year one. Many international players redshirt in year one or play very little. Again, Rui is an example. Martinez Arlauskas is an example. Filip Petrusev is an example. I don't expect Krajnovic to redshirt. I don't think that it would be the worst-case scenario. There are things that could happen that would be, I suppose, worse than that. But I don't think that's the case. There's not enough guard depth on this roster for Krajnovic to redshirt. So I don't expect that to be the case. But I do think that a worst case scenario could develop where he is just kind of outside that rotation. He's the 10th guy. Ben Gregg is 6th, Dusty Stromer 7th, Jun Sak-Yo is 8, Braden Huff is 9, and Krajnovic is 10. And in a 10th man role, you're playing 3 to 4 minutes per game. You're playing, some games you play 8 minutes because the game's way out of hand. Some games sometimes you don't play for 2 weeks. 3 weeks at a time, or you play 1 minute in a 3-week span. That is a role that has always existed at Gonzaga. And in a worst case scenario, again, for Krajnovic, that is his role next year. And what's interesting about these worst case scenarios is it's not necessarily bad. It's dependent on how things go from there. Many, many players have had seasons where they do not play at Gonzaga. They play garbage time only. They don't get in the mix regularly. And many of those players have gone on to have outstanding careers. Julian Strawther is a very recent and very notable example of that. But there are plenty more. There are also players who do not play much as a freshman and then kind of wash out, whether because there was attitude issues or expectations were not met, whether just because they weren't quite good enough to be there. Like, those things happen. So for Krajnovic, if he is in a situation where he plays very little this year, it doesn't mean that we're going down a path where he's a guy who never ends up playing significant minutes. But it also doesn't guarantee that he's going to be in the NBA in 2 years like it happened with Julian Strawther. It just means we won't really know. The development that is happening for him will be happening behind the scenes. It'll be happening in practices. It'll be happening in video sessions with the coaching staff, all that stuff. Things that you just don't see until really the next year. Things we're hoping to see for Braden Huff this year. How did that redshirt year go? People talk him up a lot. What is that going to look like? We know Ben Gregg developed a ton in his time spent on the bench. So there's no reason to assume that it won't happen for Krajnovic. But if we're talking worst case scenario in this upcoming season, it's that he's not really in the rotation. It's that he's not playing all that much. It's that when he does play, he's a little streaky. He's a little inconsistent. He doesn't quite hold down a rotation spot because he goes 0 for 6 in a two-week period of time because he only played 5 minutes. He's not able to knock down shots. He's turnover prone. He struggles on defense, things that you kind of expect from 19-year-old freshmen. If those things happen for him and he's just outside the rotation, that may be all that we see from him. and kind of the pervasive memories of Luka Krajnovic as a freshman are, oh, he was a little inconsistent, or we saw a few glimpses, but for the most part, he just kind of looked like he was still adjusting to the speed of Division I college basketball, whatever it may be. All that stuff may be the worst case scenario for this year, but again, it may not be that bad. It might be a blessing in disguise. It might be him just perfectly in line with the trajectory that this team kind of has for him. That's what makes some of these projections a little bit difficult, because not playing much this year isn't necessarily a bad thing for Luka Krajnovic. What I want to talk about now is, what are the realistic role and expectations? Do we actually expect him to play as much as Malachi Smith, or is he going to be completely out of the rotation? What might that look like, as well as his future in the program? All that coming up after a word from today's sponsor, eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. Folks, what brings home the winning trophy is also what helps keep your ride or die alive. And eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED lights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. And with over 122 million parts to choose from for your number one ride or die, you will always be sure that you can find exactly what you are looking for. Plus, with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your car every time, or you'll get your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that trophy. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply, and eBay's Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Now, folks, closing out the show today, first episode of the month of November. College basketball is back, friends, and we are so excited to be talking about real game action in just a couple of episodes. But again, today we're continuing our player preview series here, talking freshman guard Luka Krajnovic. I think we got 4 or 5 more of these. We're going to hopefully have them all done before that November 10th game against Yale. We're kind of running right up to it as we get these player previews done. But these are some of my favorite episodes every year. I'm excited to get a chance to talk about newcomers and new players the way that we just have with Krajnovic. We talked about his history, his professional season last year in Croatia, his opportunity to play at Craziness in the Kennel. We talked some best and worst case scenarios for him this upcoming season. And as it typically happens, the expected role, expected production falls somewhere in the middle of those best and worst case scenarios. So for me, I do think Krajnovic is going to be kind of just inside the rotation. And it's partly just because of the players around him. Again, there isn't a lot of guard depth on this roster. Mark Few and Gonzaga, I think, are pretty confident that Krajnovic can play kind of a versatile 1 or 2 role, because they don't have anybody else on the roster to do it. They need him to. Again, maybe Dusty Stromer is going to play more of a 1-2 role than I'm projecting. That's certainly possible. If they're really bullish on Stromer's ability to do that, it could be an indication that Krajnovic maybe isn't ready for that role right away. But for me, my prediction is, again, starting 5, with Ben Gregg at the 6, and then I think Stromer and Krajnovic kind of compete for those 7th, 8th man minutes. Jun Sok-Yo, I did have him kind of in that higher range. I think that there's a chance that he's still developing and that he might not be quite ready for a big time role right away. I could be wrong. I'd be quite happy to be wrong about that. I think he's got some tantalizing potential, but we didn't see a ton from him in Craziness. We didn't see a ton from him in the Baylor scrimmage reportedly. So I think there's a chance that Dusty and Luka are kind of competing for those 7th, 8th man minutes. And I think that his competition with Dusty Stromer for minutes is one of the most intriguing storylines coming into the season. I haven't done a full storylines episode. Maybe I'll try to sneak one of those in before the start of the actual season against Yale. But this storyline of which of these 2 freshman guards is going to absorb more minutes is interesting to me, because they're very different in a lot of ways. They're both bigger guards. Krajnovic is 6'5", Stromer's 6'6", but Stromer's more of a wing. He's longer. He's a lot thinner. Obviously came through, the development here in the United States, was from California, played some really high-level basketball, high school basketball. Whereas Krajnovic is a little bit smaller, a little bit stockier, not as thin. He's a little bit bulkier. He's played against professionals. He's played at a different level. So they have different skill sets. They have different experiences. I don't think they're super comparable players, but looking at this roster, it is clear that there is probably some playing time for both of them, but it's probably not going to be even. So for me, who plays more is one of the most intriguing things coming into this season. I'm very excited to see how it shakes out. My guess for Krajnovic is that he does play a somewhat regular role. I think it's going to look slightly different, but not dramatically different from the role of freshmen Julian Strawther and Dominick a couple of years ago when they both played about 25 games throughout the season. They played about 7-ish minutes per game, borderline in the rotation. Most of their minutes came in garbage time. That was the 2020-21 season when Gonzaga just beat the doors off everybody they played. So getting to play 7 minutes per night in garbage time is not something that's probably going to happen this year as consistently, but I also expect Krajnovic to play more. He won't just play in garbage time. He will be relied upon to give Nembhard a spell at the end of the first half, for example. He will be relied upon in foul trouble situation, and he will just play regularly to give those guys a break and be a routine part of Gonzaga's offense. That's my projection for him. Something like 7 to 10 minutes per game. 8 minutes a night, 9 minutes a night, 3 to 4, 4 to 5 points, somewhere in there. Not going to blow you away with his overall season averages, but he'll score a couple points a night. And I think we're going to see some inconsistencies, because that's typically what you see from freshmen, from international freshmen, from new Division I basketball players. You see the highs, you see the lows. The players who rarely have lows are the elite high school or college freshmen, the Chet Holmgrens, the Jalen Suggses. I think Krajnovic is going to show you some excellent shot making, some high basketball IQ, some moves where you're like, wow, I didn't know he had that in his bag. And I also think we're going to see mistakes because he's a 19-year-old freshman who's played in the United States for the first time, and he only got here in August. It's understandable that we're going to see kind of some highs and lows from him, but I'm excited to see what he can bring. I'm excited to see the battle between him and Dusty Stromer. Again, different roles, but they are going to be competing for a finite amount of minutes in that backcourt, in that kind of wing rotation for Gonzaga. And then there's the future, and I'm very intrigued by how this is going to shake out long-term for Gonzaga's backcourt, because Nolan Hickman, Ryan Nembhard, Luka Krajnovic, Dusty Stromer, every single one of them could come back. And there's not any reason at this point to indicate they will not. Obviously, if Nembhard or Hickman or somebody were to pop and feel like they had NBA potential, they could leave. Obviously, if a season doesn't go as planned for any of those guys, they can enter the transfer portal. That is a very obvious and easy way to make moves this offseason. Of course, Krajnovic could go back home if he wanted to. Like, there are tons of options. Injuries, knock on wood, of course, could be a factor here as well. But it wouldn't shock me if at this time next year, previewing the 2024-25 Gonzaga basketball season, if all 4 of these guys are still back. And we're going to be having a really interesting conversation at that time, because presumably Luka and Dusty will have earned more minutes. I think it's easy to expect that from their freshman year to their sophomore year, they will get better, they will get stronger, they will get just more familiar with playing Division I college basketball, and they will want more minutes, and they will deserve more minutes. But Mark Few's not going to just stop playing Ryan Nembhard and Nolan Hickman as seniors. So what's going to happen? Could there be more minutes at the 3? Well, it depends. Technically, Steele Venters and Jun Sakyo could both come back too. The only player who's not coming back next year is Anton Watson, guaranteed. We know that. He's gone. Everybody else could come back. And there are some young players on this team that may not play a ton as freshmen, but that I expect to play a lot more as sophomores. And whether that actually happens is kind of dependent on some roster churn that may not happen. We're a long ways away from having to project the lineups and rotations for 24-25, but it is an interesting note that I know I said on the Dusty Stromer show and that I wanted to toss in here as well. Beyond that, Luka's got 3 more years of eligibility after this year. I think there's a good chance he's here for all 4 years. He grows steadily, improves. By the time he's a junior, by the time he's a senior, he's a really big piece of Gonzaga's roster, big part of their lineup, maybe a starter, all that stuff. I don't know what the NBA future looks like for Luka. Typically, I kind of give an NBA projection at the end of these shows. I have no idea. I haven't seen nearly enough of him. He's 6'5". 6'5" players tend to have to be point guards in the modern NBA. I don't think he'll play point guard at Gonzaga. That could be a deterring factor for him. But if he comes in and shoots the absolute crap out of the basketball, then yeah, he's going to get some looks. So I think we're years away from that. We'll talk about that more in a future episode of Locked On Zags when we're talking about Krajnovic for his second year at Gonzaga. But certainly some intrigue and excitement about what Krajnovic could bring to this team this year. And I'm really excited to see him get some of that game action out of the way against Lewis Clark State, hopefully in that exhibition game, and then starting, of course, next Friday against Yale. It's going to wrap us up for today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Make sure to smash that like button, leave a comment on YouTube, go join the Discord channel where we're talking Gonzaga basketball 24/7. We're going to have game threads where we're talking throughout all of the games as well. Going to be a really fun way to watch Gonzaga basketball this year. So check it out if you haven't yet already. Thank you so much for listening. And until next time, as always, go Zags.